At this very moment, Russia is desperately doing everything it can so they can at least present some kind of victory before the victory parade on May 9th. But why is it so hard for Russia to advance? Which areas are at risk of being liberated? And how desperate are the Russian officials to present at least something to Putin? And these are the questions that we'll be talking about in my today's video. What's up, investors and people of Reddit, it's the Russian Dude and this is your daily update on Russian-Ukrainian war as of Friday, May 6th. You can see the main events of the day to my right, along with the timestamps. The advisor to the president of Ukraine, our favorite Alexei Arestovich, is saying that Russia will do its best to capture at least the region of Lugansk before May 9th. And according to him, the reason why they are doing this is so that they can claim some kind of victory, so they can justify their victory parade on May 9th. He also says that Russia have been trying to capture several different territories across Ukraine, but they were failing so far. For this reason, they decided to focus on one specific region where they have the best chances to succeed. So in the very beginning, the goal of Russia was to capture the east and south of Ukraine, which is, let's be honest, a pretty significant area. But later, Ukrainian forces were able to sink the Russian Navy flagship called Moskva in the Black Sea area. That is why the capture of south became so much harder. In addition to that, Ukrainian forces were demonstrating significant resistance in the south, specifically in the cities of Kherson and Mariupol. For this reason, it looks like Russia decided to give up its idea to capture south of Ukraine. And instead, they decided to double its focus on the east of the country so that they can once again present some kind of victory before May 9th. But even there, Russians were met with an incredible resistance of Ukrainian army. Ukrainians were able to resist most of the attacks and even push Russians away from its territories. And besides that, there were even several attacks on the territory of Russia. Specifically, what I'm talking about is the city of Belgorod. So as for now, we have the victory parade, which is getting closer every single day, but Russia still cannot claim any single territory to be fully liberated. And it looks like that at this very moment their last hope will be to liberate the regions of Lugansk and Donetsk. But guess what? It looks like Russia is struggling even with this one region. That is why, once again, according to Alexei Arestovich, Russia is now will be focusing on one last region, which is the region of Lugansk. But at the same time, we have this report for the Defense Intelligence of the United Kingdom, which says that Russia will be focusing on the city of Mariupol. And the reason they give is basically the same, which is to present some kind of victory before the parade. At this very moment, the last territory which is still not occupied by Russian forces in this city is this Azov-style factory. And the report claims is that Russia is bringing significant forces to finally capture this factory so that the entire city is under their control. But because the resistance of Ukrainians and the logistics of this factory is so complicated, Russia is losing way more soldiers than it should. But at this point, according to the report, Russia is doing everything it can to achieve some kind of success before May 9th. Some other reports now even suggest that Russia reduced the time for conscripts to go through training before being sent to Ukraine, which basically means that some soldiers are trained for only 4 days before being sent to Ukraine. Just imagine this: one day you're being recruited to the army, then for the next 4 days you are trained how to march and I guess hold the weapons, and the next day you are already on the track on the way to Ukraine. Tell me how fast life can change, eh? And by the way, if you like this style of daily news reporting, feel free to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, please make sure to check the link in the description if you want to support Ukraine with us. Thank you so much, and let's continue. Welcome to another episode of Ridiculous Russian Propaganda. And today we're going to be talking about this journalist who claims that he knows that Ukrainian soldiers are cannibals because he found this human canned meat. The story is pretty basic and it goes as following. Victorious Russian soldiers were able to eliminate every single Ukrainian Nazi, and whenever they entered their houses, they found several interesting items. And among such items, like mentioned previously, was the canned human meat. The journalist proceeds with his investigation and says something like this: imagine how desperate and inhumane Ukrainians must be if they're now forced to eat human flesh. In the last episode of Ridiculous Russian Propaganda, we're talking about Ukrainian berserks, and I'm excited to see what's going to be the next episode about. In this picture, we have another potential proof that the country-wide mobilization will be announced by President Putin on May 9th or later. What it basically says that companies and organizations must book their important personnel so that they will not be called to the army. Let's say so a company does not want its CEO to go to a war, so they must book him and and provide the proper documentation. In this case, if and when the mobilization will be announced, these booked people will be protected. Another proof of the potential countrywide mobilization comes to us from different Russian media sources. And they say that the first group of people that are being targeted by the enlistment offices are those people who are currently in the army reserve. Which unfortunately makes sense because those people who are currently in the reserve, they already have some kind of military experience. And here we also have Russian government official Alexei Zhuravlev, who is saying that people of Russia must prepare for potential mobilization. Was this something that just slipped from his tongue and he was not supposed to say this? We'll know soon enough. But it is also worth mentioning that when this special military operation has just started, Alexei Zhuravlev said that he'll be the first person to go to war, he'll be one of the first recruits, one of the first volunteers. And guess what? He's still in Russia and not planning to go to Ukraine in the nearest future. On this map presented to us by the Defense Intelligence of the United Kingdom, we can see the current condition of the war. And as always, the main combat action is concentrated in the east and south of the country, with the main fight at this very moment happening in the city of Mariupol. In the beginning of this week, it was reported that approximately 150 civilians were able to be evacuated from the territory of Azovstal steel factory. But then the next day the combat actions resumed once again. And according to Russian officials, the reason why Russian forces started shooting on territory factory once again, it is because Azov battalion started showing the signs of resistance. But from time to time the shooting and artillery strikes have been stopping and the evacuation was able to be resumed. And according to the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, Irina Vereshchuk, 50 more civilians were able to be rescued, with the total number of people who are able to evacuate from this factory to be approximately at 500, according to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. And by the way, if you want to see more details, feel free to pause the video. The representative of the Ministry of Defense of Latvia, Yanis Laidiniš, is mentioning that Ukraine is planning to bomb Crimean Bridge on May 9th. This is the bridge that connects the territory of Russia and Crimean Peninsula, which means in case this bridge is going to be destroyed, it will be much harder for Russian army to bring weapons to the Crimean Peninsula. There have been several reports that another ship of Russian Navy in Black Sea area, Admiral Makarov, has been sunk by Ukrainian forces. The press secretary of Russia, Dmitry Peskov, as well as the Ministry of Defense of Russia have not confirmed the fact that the ship has been sunk. And later today, the advisor to the president of Ukraine, Alexei Arestovich, also mentioned that this information is yet to be confirmed. So what we have at this very moment is that most likely the ship is still floating, but maybe there is some kind of fire. But in case the information is true, this will only continue to decrease the firepower of Russia in the south of Ukraine. Because one of the main responsibilities of these ships in this area is to provide the fire support for the troops who will be landing in the south of Ukraine. Today, the Ministry of Industry of Russia signed an order under which the imports of international brands to Russia will be allowed without the agreements from the international brands themselves. What basically means that the majority of international brands previously said that they'll be no longer exporting their goods and services to Russia. And the reason why they decided to do this is so that the taxes they pay will not sponsor the war in Ukraine. But according to this new law, Russia will be able to import these goods and they don't even need to ask the permission from the brands themselves. But interestingly enough, the majority of these brands that will be now allowed to enter Russia are kinda luxury good items. I mean, yes, some of them include goods of first necessities, but majority of them is focused on this luxury segment. For example, here you can see the category of plastic and goods that will now be allowed to enter Russia. But luxury car brands such as, for example, Lamborghini, Ferrari, Porsche and Bugatti also fall under plastic category. And the reason why they fall under this category, it is because there are components of these cars that are made out of plastic. And I mean, I guess it's going to be kind of nice if Russia allows different food to enter Russia for just people to eat, but at this point buying expensive cars to kids of oligarchs seems more important. Earlier this week, the president of Poland, Andrzej Duda, said that he does not want to see the border between Poland and Ukraine. He mentioned that he wants cooperation between these two countries at the highest level possible. And I mean, it is pretty obvious that his intentions are good, good, because it is way better to have friends next to your borders rather than enemies. But somehow the president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, was still able to see something bad in this statement. What he meant by that is that the reason why Poland doesn't want to have a border with Ukraine, it is because Poland is looking which territories they can take from Ukraine. And according to Dmitry Medvedev, if this really happens, in the future Poland can annex the west of Ukraine. The Economist magazine released an article talking about the Russian economy recovering way faster than anticipated. The article is mainly focusing on the fact that Russia was able to resist these many sanctions, and as a result the economy will not collapse completely, but instead it might suffer some recession. And two main arguments supporting this point of view was that Russia was able to avoid default by making its coupon payments. America made it harder for Russia to meet its debt obligations by freezing Russian assets in American banks, but nevertheless Russia was still able to make coupon payments. And the second argument is the strengthening of Russian currency ruble against US dollar. Just as a reminder, before this special military operation, the exchange rate between Russian ruble and US dollar was somewhere approximately 75 rubles for $1. At the very peak, the exchange rate was approximately in between 130–140 rubles. And right now, the exchange rate is somewhere in between 65 to 70 rubles. And at this graph, we can see that the Russian ruble was the strongest currency against US dollar since the beginning of this year. And the reason why Russian economy was able to resist all of these sanctions and kinda survive is because of artificial interventions from the Russian central bank. Such as, for example, that Russians were not able to buy US dollars or European euros in the beginning, and then they were allowed to do this with just very big commission. In addition to that, Russia was strongly pushing its agenda for European countries to pay for Russian gas in Russian rubles. As for now, lots of money was spent from Russian reserves to prevent Russian economy from collapsing, but it is estimated that this strategy is not sustainable in long term. And for my Patreons, don't forget that we have summary of the week livestream that will be available on my Patreon today at 10 PM Eastern Standard Time. Thank you so much for your attention, stay safe, check the link in the description, and see you on Monday.